First Balkan War in 1912. There was an agreement between the Kingdom of Serbia, the Kingdom of Greece, the Kingdom of Bulgaria, how to defeat the Ottoman Empire, how to finally expel the Ottoman Empire from Europe and from the Balkans. And in those agreements, the Serbs and the Bulgarians, how should I put it, verbally, but not on paper, agreed to divide today's Macedonia literally diagonally. So the northwestern part would go to Serbia, the southeastern part would go to Bulgaria. Fine, let's go to war, let's defeat the Turks. And the Serbs were quite successful. We achieved all our goals. We defeated the Ottoman army a couple of times and we said woohoo. The Bulgarians, however, got involved into trying to get the, what's the name of it? Here, literally on top of Beli Hill. This is the very peak of Beli Hill, from where, at the time when the palace was finished, because there were not much urban tissue around the palace, there were no skyscrapers anyway, not even skyscrapers, there were not many tall buildings at all. You could see Belgrade not on this side, on the other side, at least some parts of Belgrade, and vice versa. The Royal Palace could be seen from many spots in Belgrade. Today, there's a lovely view over southern parts of Belgrade, Košutnjak and Topčide forests. There is a view, no, today not, there's fog, I believe. Now, well, you can barely see New Belgrade across the Sava River. Anyway, the king really wanted his home to be on a very, very dominant position to reflect the fact of the book. Yes, absolutely. Over. All right.
Oh my God.
The Royal Chapel, dedicated to Saint Andrew the First, called the patron saint of our royal family. Patron saints are extremely important in Serbian Orthodox Church. Every family in our country has their own patron saint. In my family, it is Saint Nicholas. For the royal family, Saint Andrew the First called, which they celebrate every year on the 13th of December. The church, of course, was built on the model of our medieval monasteries. This is how our medieval monasteries look like. And the artists who painted the frescoes actually took a tour of our medieval monasteries before they began painting the walls of the royal chapel. Now, I mentioned that different parts of the royal compound of the private estate of King Alexander I had quite different fates under the communist regime after the Second World War. The Royal Palace was used as an exclusive residence for the visiting foreign heads of states. The White Palace was turned into an office of the President of the Republic, and the Royal Chapel, of course, was closed down. For a while, even used as a gardening equipment shed or a storage room. And right at the end of the Second World War in our country, which was in October 1944, we just celebrated, yes, a week ago. Not really much, but there were official events marking that day, the so-called liberation. The Royal Chapel was desecrated. If you take a look up in the dome, you will recognize a huge bullet hole right in the middle of Christ's forehead.
That's crazy.
Indeed. The communists were really insanely against religion, and from today's point of view, rather sensible attitude unless you view them as a competing religion, which they actually were. It is a very weird, morbid religion without God, without saints, without many other concepts of Judeo-Christian religions. However, a religion nonetheless, an ideology that is so deeply embedded in the followers that it can be viewed as a religion, and as such, they hated all other religions, and accordingly, of course, the Serbian Orthodox Church. So the church was desecrated, closed down, but on a couple of occasions, visiting foreign heads of states would learn that there is a royal chapel adjoining the royal palace, and some of them, at least as much as we know, 3 times, expressed their wish to use the church. So on that occasions, the priests would be forcibly brought here, made to reconsecrate the chapel and provide everything that was necessary for the service. Of course, as soon as the visiting guest would leave, the church would be desecrated again and closed down again. And so they played that sick game all along 2001, when the royal family finally came back and will hold reconsecrated and reopened the royal chapel once and for all. So today, this is a fully functional Serbian Orthodox Church where there are services every Easter, every Christmas, and of course every St. Andrew's Day celebrated. The balconies for the choir. Choir is a very important part of our services. A small example of our government's attitude to the royal compound. At one point in time, they reluctantly accepted the fact that the royal chapel needs restoration quite badly. So they did bring young people from the Institute for Protection of Cultural Monuments, the conservatories, no, the restore, what do you call the people who do restorations? I don't know. Anyway, sorry?
I said conservation, but I don't know. I think restoration was conservation.
Restoration is?
Restoring, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, they began doing quite a nice job. If you take a look at some parts of the iconostasis, you will recognize that they were restored very nicely. And, for example, this bar above the altar door with the portraits of the saints was restored, and the small square to the right side was deliberately left to show the condition of the iconostasis before the intervention. But at another point, the government just said, okay, we don't have enough money to do that. They just stopped in the middle of the process. And today, a third of the iconostasis is restored, or even only a quarter. The rest remained the same and waits for better times.
Were any of these paintings restored? I noticed there's different ones.
No! You might be referring to this icon. The original actually was stolen. There is a speculation that it ended up in our National Museum. And what you're looking at is a really bad copy made for one of the occasions when the visiting head of state wanted to use the church. Somebody noticed, oh my God, there's a hole on the left side of the altar door. So there is another part legend that they brought a soldier for whom they knew that was an amateur painter, and he piece of wood overnight, which looks a little like Serbian Orthodox icons, but not really. Not
So it's like that thing you do with
All right. Great interest in reconnecting with Serbia's medieval past. In the 13th and the 14th century, Serbia was a quite prosperous medieval country. Our medieval king left many beautiful monasteries all over Serbia, and the art from those monasteries was the main source of inspiration for the architects who designed and especially decorated the royal palace. You can see that right here in the entrance hall, where all the decorative architectural elements were actually copied from our monasteries, and this room is also decorated by the copies of the fresco. In the entrance hall, there is also this representative portrait of King Peter II, the eldest son to King Alexander I, and the father to his royal highness. Now, follow me to the royal library. Now, in addition to the so-called Serbian Byzantine style, there are several other influences on decorating the royal palace. Here in the library, that would be the art of the Italian Renaissance. The ceiling, the way the furniture was made, the bookcases all point out to a great influence of the Italian Renaissance art on decorating the royal palace. On top of the bookcases, two more portraits of King Peter II from his younger years. His bust in gypsum from 1935, when the young king was 12, a year after he became the king of Yugoslavia, after his father had been assassinated in Marseille in 1934. And on the opposite one, his head in bronze from 1940, when the young king was 17 years old. All right. The royal family used to live here from 1929, when the palace was finished, until the breakout of the Second World War in our country, which happened in the spring of 1941. Following his government's decision, the king, who was not fully 18 years old at the time, left the country and joined other European monarchs who did exactly the same thing, like Norwegian King Haakon, or the Dutch Queen Wilhelmina, or the Grand Duchess of Luxembourg, Charlotte, or the Greek King George. They all were in London approximately at the same time as King Peter II, or even before him. The other European monarchs, after the end of the Second World War, returned to their homelands, some of them to heroes' welcome, like the Dutch Queen, for example, but not our King Peter II, because there was a change of government in our country. The so-called Communist Revolution happened. The communists, of course, were extremely against monarchy and the royal family. They banned the return to the homeland, to the royal family. A couple of years later, they even issued a notorious decree which stripped the entire royal family of their citizenship and confiscated the entire property of the royal family. So King Peter II spent the rest of his life in exile and died in the United States, in Denver, Colorado. That's right, for a while he was the only monarch ever to be buried in the US soil. That's right, until 2013, when there was a state funeral organized by the government, so basically, when all the members of the royal family who had died in exile, King Peter II, his mother, Queen Maria Karageorgievich, his wife, Queen Alexandra, and the king's younger brother, Prince Andrew, were all brought back to Serbia and re-entered into the royal mausoleum in a place called Oplenac, where there is a beautiful church of St. George, and in the crypt of St. George's Church in Oplenac, all members of our royal family are now buried. If you have more time and if you're planning on traveling around Serbia, I strongly suggest you visit Oplenac. There's a beautiful foundation of King Peter I, the grandfather to King Peter II, with one of the most beautiful Serbian churches, the Royal Mausoleum. All right, follow me to the blue salon. As I said, the communists did use the royal palace and maintained it quite well, one must admit, except for the weird fact that they never restored the plumbing down here in the basement. This key was used to turn the fountain on and off. However, for quite a while, for many decades I would say, it's been out of order, so we never verified whether the legend of the fountain is true or not. Alright, from the room of whispers to the king's wine cellars. However, the king never allowed smoking anywhere inside the royal palace except in this room, so this is where he would spend his life, all of his free time, whenever he could. The purpose of the room was discovered after the Second World War by the communist regime, who also used it in the same way. Only our then uncrowned monarch / president for life did not smoke cigarettes. He was a fan of Cuban cigars, of course. So, because he would take his closest comrades down here, at some point they were irritated, they were annoyed by the royal coats of arms painted on the ceiling. As I mentioned, they had a very ambivalent relationship with the royal palace, at least to say. On the one hand, they hated the monarchy and the royal family, but they didn't mind at all using the king's strictly private property for themselves. And on the third side, they were very much against even the symbols of monarchy. So they ordered all the royal coats of arms, all the royal initials, all the crowns to be either painted over or removed. Like in this room, where they replaced it with 5-pointed communist red stars. There's one over here and the one over there. But they didn't quite fully manage to complete the process. Let me show you why. Well, the Emperor Dusan, whom I mentioned in the King's Wine Cellar, actually considered taking Constantinople, Istanbul today. The Byzantine Empire was crumbling in the 12th and the 13th, and especially in the 14th century. So our king was thinking quite seriously of taking on the Byzantine Empire and Constantinople and becoming himself Emperor of the Romans, of the Eastern Roman Empire. That's what Serbia was in the Middle Ages. And then the Ottomans came. It's true. Well, that's historical destiny. We were not the only ones, of course. The entire Balkan Peninsula fell under Ottoman Empire. It was an inevitable historical process. Even if we like to speculate what would have happened if Emperor Dusan had lived longer, because he was really a great ruler and very capable military commander. But even him couldn't stop Ottoman Empire. In the 14th century, in the mid-14th century, nobody could stop the Ottoman Empire from taking over the Balkan Peninsula. It was only a matter of time. A decade more or less meant really practically nothing at that time. So yes, that's our history. Anyway, that's why we appropriated the double-headed white eagle and we restored it in 1882 when Serbia once again declared itself a kingdom, and it was our official coat of arms all along until the end of the Second World War, when the communists came, and then of course they removed it from everywhere, and then it took us another 7 decades to restore it once again to be the coat of arms of this time the Republic of Serbia. Now the blue salon is an example of the third major influence on decorating the Royal Palace, and that would be the art of the French Baroque. The furniture was made on the model of Louis XV and Louis XVI styles, and this was decorated by two very nice French Baroque paintings. This one in front of me is Nicolas Poussin and Venus and Adonis. And on the opposite wall, a little older Venetian Baroque master, Carlo Cadari, and the Rape of Europe. Both paintings, late 17th century. Now in the blue salon, there are displayed photographs of the members of our royal family. King Alexander I, his wife, Queen Maria Karađorđević, a Romanian princess, before her marriage to the king. In front of the other mirror, 3 sons of King Alexander and Queen Maria, King Peter II, and his 2 younger brothers from their later years, Prince Andrei and Prince Tomislav Karađorđević. A photograph of young King Alexander from 1922, a year after he became the king of the Serbs, the Croats and the Slovenes, which some 9 years later became the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. And let me just show you some photographs of King Peter's family. The king, Queen Alexandra of Yugoslavia, his wife, a Greek princess, and their only child, young Crown Prince Alexander, when he was 2 years old. This photograph was taken in London in 1947, in the year when the notorious communist decree was issued, by which each and every member of the royal family was not only stripped of the citizenship and banned returned to the country, but also declared the so-called enemy of the state, including young Crown Prince Alexander, who was less than 2 years old at the time. The Crown Prince likes to make a joke on that topic, saying that he was a very dangerous toddler. Alright, from the blue salon, follow me to the golden salon. Ceiling, a very nice example of Italian Renaissance art. All the paintings in this room are approximately from the same period, which means late 15th, first half of the 16th century, all by the Italian Renaissance masters, not by the A-list painters such as Botticelli or Raphael, but this is Jacopo Palma il Vecchio, and the Holy Family with St. Catherine, St. John the Baptist, and the donor of the painting. There is a portrait of an unknown young noblewoman by Bernardo Licinio on the other side of the door. And on the side wall, the two round-shaped so-called tondo paintings. The one on the left, Andrea Alovici, the Holy Family with the baby Christ and young future John the Baptist. And on the right side, Pietro Antonio and Madonna with baby Christ and two angels. The view. I'm going to show you the view when we go out to the Royal Chapel. You will of course understand why the king chose this particular spot for his home. Below the tondos are those two large, rather strange looking boxes for which our younger visitors always ask, are those sarcophagus? No, they're not. They're the so-called casoni. The casoni were actually bed sheet boxes, linen chests, made in pair because they were a wedding present to a newlywed couple of the two Florentine aristocratic families of the first half of the 16th century. And since they were made for the groom and the bride, they've got their portraits on the inside. This one, the groom, a young nobleman from the Florentine 16th century family of Nasi.
Interesting.
How standards of male beauty have changed from at this time. This young aristocrat was probably considered quite handsome. Not so much with the female standards of beauty, because there's the portrait of the bride, a young lady from the Florentine 16th century family of Frescobaldi. Right. There is a nice story that the casoni, which were a wedding present when they were made, came to the royal palace also as a wedding present to a newlywed king, Alexander and Queen Maria. However, it was established that most likely they were just purchased once when the king had already been married, so after 1922. From the Golden Salon, the road takes us to the dining room. The dining room, where you can see the eclectic approach of the architects who designed and decorated the royal palace, where the elements of the Italian Renaissance art, the French Baroque, neoclassical style, and Serbian Byzantine style all intertwine into a unique impression. The front wall, decorated by this magnificent French 17th century goblin from the workshop of Charles Le Brun, a very well-known French Baroque artist, depicting the triumph of Alexander the Great, figure with a big helmet on the left side of the goblin, over the Persian Emperor Darius and his family. Opposite the French goblin, the portraits of Serbian kings. To the far left, a joint portrait of King Peter I and King Alexander I, a Montenegrine artist, Spiro Boceric. In front of me, straight ahead in front of me, the equestrian portrait of King Alexander I by a French artist, Georges Scott. And to the right side of the door from the Golden Salon, another representative portrait of young King Peter II by a Croatian artist, Tomislav Krizman. That's the portrait in which the young king was deliberately portrayed with some of the regalia. He's wearing the royal mantle belonging to his grandfather, King Peter I, in which King Peter I was crowned in Belgrade in 1904. In his hands, he's holding a saber belonging to his father, King Alexander I, the same saber that you can see in the equestrian portrait. And of course, the young king is wearing the highest decorations of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. The portrait was made in order to reassure the viewers that although King Alexander I was assassinated in 1934, the dynasty continues to rule the country through a new king, the young King Peter II.
And this is the room and the table where we had the meeting, Adam and I and Prince Alexander and the embassy people and people from the UN to work out the logistics of this grant that led all of you to be here today, that happened right here at this table.
That's right. The entire ground floor of the Royal Palace is used for some official meetings and events. Only the upstairs, only the first floor are the private premises of the royal family. Just the same as it used to be at the time of King Alexander I. Actually, the king's idea was to have a strictly private home outside the city. In 1924, when the construction began, this part of Belgrade wasn't really considered actually a part of Belgrade. Dedinje at the time was just another hill outside the city. But as soon as the citizens of Belgrade learned that the king was going to build his villa here, everybody wanted to live near the king, and this is how this part of Belgrade became a proper Beverly Hills of Belgrade, with I believe almost all the embassies or ambassadors' residences some 500 meters away from the royal palace. But once the royal palace was finished, it was the king who loved his home so much that he decided to invite the ministers and the politicians and everybody else to come to his private place instead of receiving them in the so-called Old Palace, which today is the City Hall of Belgrade. That's the only original proper royal court of Serbia, built in the 19th century as the official seat of our kings. So the king himself turned his private home into a royal palace, with some state events and official occasions organized right here in the dining room or in the salon. All right, now I'm taking you to the most interesting part of the royal palace, at least according to most of our visitors, the basement room. Follow me. Yeah. Paul's family used to live, and especially unlike the communist reign period, today the White Palace is used only for organizing events, mostly humanitarian, charitable events organized by the foundation of Her Royal Highness Crown Princess Catherine, but also many other events, including arranging White Palace for corporate events. Many corporates are organized here. For dinners too, you don't see the big dining table now, but you can see 36 people. So there are some very nice dinners organized here. Speaking of dinners, the front hall is decorated by probably the most expensive part of the entire art collection of the royal compound. This French 18th century porcelain set, commissioned by the younger brother of King Louis XVI of France as a wedding gift to the Spanish king. The original set consisted of 200 pieces, each one handmade, each one gilt-plated, each one depicting different species of birds and butterflies from all over the world known at that time in France. The White Palace only has about 80 pieces of the set that were next president for life, successor to our actual president for life, / the Hague indictee, who particularly loved to be televised from this room. When we had His Excellency the Ambassador rather recently, he remembered fondly the times when he would sit here on this sofa and chat with Mr. Milosevic. Mr. Honor was present there too, of course. And right in front of this fireplace, there were a couple of so-called historical addresses to the nation by the then President of the Republic. As I said, the White House was used as the office of President of the Republic all along until 2001. Which is another reason why it gained so much notoriety and why it's today so much more known than the Royal Palace, which actually was a home of the royal family. The small salon, ladies' room, with another example of Baroque art, Venetian in this case, Giovanni Antonio Canal, called Canaletto, a painter who got both his surname and his nickname after the motifs of his paintings, the Canals of Venice. To the left and to the right of Canaletto, two portraits for which it was believed to be Rembrandt's at the time when they were brought to the White Palace. However, almost immediately, art historians agreed that those actually were Rembrandt's students, somebody from his school of art, obviously, but not the great master himself. There was one true Rembrandt at the White Palace, but it was taken when King Peter II left the country. It can be traced to Montenegro and to the town of Nikšić, where there is an airport from which the king and the government flew to Athens and then to Jerusalem and then eventually to London. But there in Nikšić, in today's Montenegro, any trace of Rembrandt gets lost, and we can only speculate whether it was Italian fascists who took it, or the Nazis, or the Russians when they came in 1944. No one knows. So the Rembrandt is missing. Yeah. The communists especially had absolutely no intention of letting the public. On the contrary, they loved mythologizing the place. They turned this into a proper forbidden city of Belgrade. Another reason why such notoriety of the White House. But then in 2001, the royal family decided to open it to the public, and of course today, tourist organization of Belgrade brings visitors every weekend, April to November, every Sunday, every Saturday. Also, tour operators can bring their groups when they agree with the royal family. So yes, the royal compound is fully open to the public. We calculated that we had tens of thousands of visitors since 2000. When it was open for the first time. The library is the best example of the communist rule. This is where our president for life would chair the meetings of the so-called Politburo. Politburo is the top echelon, was the top echelon of the Communist Party. So this literally is the place where most important decisions in communist Yugoslavia were brought. Today, the books that you see in the library are a strange combination of the books belonging to Prince Paul Karađorđević, many books that were brought here after the Second World War during the communist reign, and this smaller shelf over there are some books that used to belong to Queen Maria Karađorđević, the wife of King Alexander I, although the Queen actually never lived here at the White House. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Not really. It's all right. You're welcome. Please go ahead.
Yes, you talked about the different forms of art influences.
That's right.
And I was writing them down, and there's Italian Renaissance, French Hmong, or French
Italian Renaissance, French Baroque,
Baroque. Okay, yes, I'm sorry. And then there was Russian as well.
Russian traditional art,
Russian
Byzantine.
Serbian Byzantine style.
Serbian Byzantine. Yeah.